So I was just about to do a different video entirely, and then this caught my attention when I was going back on RT to go see the original video I was going to present. RT has had since October 7th, has spent a disproportionate amount of time on Gaza. So it's almost rare to find something about Ukraine. And I was just going back, I was going to talk about the president announcing his candidacy, and I had prepared for that. And then I was scrolling back through, and I'm seeing like Israel prime minister threaten whatever families of Israel hostages, mock coffins of Palestine, thousands march on London and another national march in Palestine. IDF raids Gaza. Again, it's all Israel, Gaza, Israel, Gaza. And then I saw an influx of foreign aid makes Ukraine conflict no longer regional. I thought, let's go look at that. So that's what we're going to watch, how this is presented on RT. So let's just understand that they're trying to influence the Western world, because this is English speaking, about Russia's positions here. So that's how they're going to frame it. So let's listen and see what they have to say.
The Ukraine conflict can no longer be considered regional due to the massive influx of foreign aid to Kiev. Now, that's according.
Okay, now the regional bit. Some folks like Ron DeSantis and others had said that, well, this is just a regional conflict. It's not something that we are, we need to be interested in. It's not, as opposed to those like Mike Pence and Nikki Haley in the same primaries were saying, no, this is an important thing. It can spill over. It can trigger Article 5 in NATO and become a much broader conflict. Okay, so that's to set the table.
To Kurt Campbell, Joe Biden's top pick for Deputy Secretary of State.
Look, the truth is the struggle, the desperate struggle in Ukraine is no longer just a regional conflict. Many outside players are hugely invested. What's different about this conflict, not only have we seen substantial resources from Europe, even greater than from the United States, but huge support for the Indo-Pacific because they understand the stakes.
Now, that's a really interesting perspective. If you think about the Ukraine war in terms of who's feeding weapons, supplies, people, whatever into it, okay, whatever it is that's going into that. I was looking at another article about more Cubans coming to fight for Russia. For whichever side, it is a international war in many ways, even if it's only Ukraine and Russia really duking it out on the ground at this point.
Come despite Washington's insistence that NATO's involvement in the conflict is actually.
And my last point wasn't entirely fair. There's the International Legion in Ukraine. There's people from many countries in Ukraine, and there's like Cubans, and there are a few other nationalities on the Russian side that are much fewer and further between. But the Russians keep trying to lure in Africans or some other players in order to backfill their ranks. So when I say at this point, I wasn't saying at this point because we're going to have American boots on the ground. No. Nobody's advocating for that here. Okay, so. Okay,
she designed to stop it from spilling over Ukraine's borders. Moscow, for its part, has always affirmed that US-led interference provoked the war in the first place.
Of course they did. They said that it was the US that made them do it. I did another video just yesterday where I was talking about that was actually the headline in the thumbnail, that the West made them do it. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that that video in just a moment. But where's the personal responsibility? Who flooded across the border? It was the Russians flooding across the border. Oh, because NATO is encroaching? Every Warsaw Pact country is now in NATO. They left you for a reason. They didn't want to be part of your system anymore or your oppression anymore. So you need to think through that.
And that it is open to peace talks, which Kiev and its Western backers have so far rejected. Now, Kiev has relied on a free flow of military aid from NATO and its partners further afield since February last year. For example, Washington's Asia Pacific.
Okay, and it works both ways, right? I mean, the Russians are working on getting their equipment from Iran and shells from North Korea, and so it is working both ways. So it is really what the gentleman being interviewed said is actually right. There is an influx of foreign aid that's making this conflict not a regional but a international conflict. And I think it's hard to deny that.
Pacific allies, Japan, South Korea, and Australia have contributed aid, while also joining the anti-Russia sanctions. Other regional players, though, namely China, India, North Korea, have faced criticism for refusing to cut ties with Moscow. Radio host and political commentator Steve Gill says that the Biden administration is building up Russia's image as a boogeyman to win more support.
Okay, first, the Biden administration does not need to build up Russia's image as a boogeyman. Just look on Wikipedia at the list of war crimes that the Russians have inflicted on Ukraine. It'll curl your hair. And you don't have to build up Putin's image as a boogeyman. He's done it to himself by what he has done since 2022. Second thing I would say is, what do you think, what kind of commentator do you think that RT is going to bring in here? Is it they're going to be somebody that is pro-Russia or against Russia's position or what? Of course, they're going to sing the same party tune.
Support for Ukraine.
He is repeating the misinformation that the Biden administration is putting out there. I was listening to some news stories today talking about how that if we, as the U.S. and the Western allies, don't stop Putin in Ukraine, he's going to roll across Ukraine, roll into Finland, roll into Sweden. Nothing could be further from the truth. And they keep quoting.
Okay, so if nothing is further from the truth, then why did just yesterday I showed you this video where we have a Russian general talking like this?
And that these are our values, and right, because, and they're communicating with both of these lines. They're communicating what they really believe and what they really want their people to believe. But they're telling us right now this war is just the starting point, which means that they're going to go on. If you think about it, it's very important because people were mocking Austin when he's saying, like, if we don't do this now.
Well, hold on to that thought, Let's listen to this. Keep going.
These statements, but they never quote who's saying that those are the Russian ambitions. So they're trying to create a boogeyman to scare people into doing more. And the summer offensive, the spring offensive, the fall offensive, the winter offensive, I don't know how many offensives we've been through that have not produced any results for Ukraine, despite the billions of dollars in armament and
that's another Russian line that they want to say, like, you keep supporting this and nothing's going anywhere. Yeah, the last offensive was pretty rough. It really was, honestly. And Russia had time to build up its capability, so it was rough. But this doesn't mean that it's all over. You're throwing good money after bad, but that's what they want to project.
Munitions that have been dispatched from Europe and from the U.S. taxpayers. And just this week, you had Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, basically in briefings to Congress, tell them if they won't pass the aid for Ukraine, he's going to send their sons and daughters and cousins and uncles to die in Ukraine. I don't think the American people want to send much more money to Ukraine. I know they don't want to send boots on the ground to Ukraine.
Okay, and they don't want to send boots on the ground. And he didn't threaten that we're going to send this if you don't do this. He said, look, if you don't fund this, you're going to have a problem because if Russia trips the Article 5, that's what's going to happen. Not that we're going to do it anyway. So he was not being faithful to it. But let's listen to yesterday's me again.
They're going to trip NATO Article 5, and then we're going to have to send our sons and daughters. Right? He's saying it's just a starting point. So let's not be hard on Austin when he's saying this here. Only Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin himself could confront the most satanic nations. And again, he's talking about America and then the West broadly speaking, all of whom are joined together as one, believing that nothing could stand in their way. Okay, so they're not starting it. The Russians crossed the border. That triggered the West coming to their aid. They weren't beating up on Russia, and then the Russians had to cross the border. His revision of history is just alarming, using only our own resources. He, Putin, was able to personally confront this Satanism and lead all of our people along with him. Believe me when I tell you, what we're seeing today is the beginning. Again, he keeps telling you this is the beginning. We're going to keep going.
So they said it was just the beginning. So whatever this guy's saying about how, no, they're not saying it is. They're just making this up. Putin's a boogeyman. He's not going to keep... A general's telling you this is just the beginning. So, okay. So this is how RT has framed this and spun it for an English audience like you and me, who they think we're gullible and susceptible and we're only going to hear one side or something. So, okay, tell me what you thought about this. Certainly this was not a fair way of framing it, but I think the undersecretary appointee is right that Ukraine is not a regional conflict. It is an international conflict because of all the players involved in the conflict, and settling it there, this is me saying, settling it there is what is important. This is what Zelensky has said. We're fighting for the rest of the world. We're just happen to be doing it in Ukraine. All right. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.